I've spent my whole life being invisible to my family, until one birthday dinner changed everything. The private dining room at La Serenita had been booked for nearly 3 months. My mother's 59th birthday was meant to be flawless. 22 relatives. Polished stone tables imported from Italy. White lilies placed carefully at every setting. My older sister Lauren had spent weeks explaining the planning process to anyone who paused long enough to listen. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the blue dress my mother once described as too plain for a woman your age. My parents barely looked up when I walked in. My father was comparing golf grips with my brother-in-law, while my mother admired Lauren's new SUV key fob as if it were a diamond bracelet. Top model, Lauren announced for at least the 4th time. Heated seats, panoramic roof, full package. We finally decided we deserved something nice. I smiled politely and took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, next to my cousin's 8-year-old daughter who was completely absorbed in a game on her tablet. According to Lauren, the seating arrangement had been very intentional. I was placed as far from the birthday woman as possible while technically still being in the room. That wasn't new. Family gatherings had always felt like carefully choreographed performances where my role was silent background furniture. About 20 minutes later, Uncle Daniel rushed in, slightly out of breath, tie crooked. He was my father's younger brother, a tech-focused attorney based in Northern California. We didn't see him often, but we exchanged emails now and then about industry articles or research topics. Sorry, he said, kissing my mother's cheek before scanning the table. His face lit up when he spotted me. There you are, Clara, he said, bypassing the empty seat beside my father and heading straight toward me. I stood to hug him. How's life after that patent sale? He asked casually. Last I heard, it closed at around $3.5 million, right? The room didn't just go quiet. It went silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Lauren froze mid-sentence. My brother-in-law paused with his glass halfway to his mouth. My father's hand stopped in the air. My mother's expression moved rapidly from confusion to recognition to panic. What patent? She whispered. I took a slow sip of water and waited. Uncle Daniel, completely unaware of the emotional landmine he'd stepped on, continued enthusiastically. The moisture-responsive coating, Clara. Incredible work. The agricultural applications alone. You sold a patent? My father asked slowly. Yes, I said calmly. Last spring. To Greenfield Innovations. My mother gripped her napkin so tightly her knuckles turned white. That was almost a year ago. 11 months, I confirmed. Lauren laughed sharply. That's not funny. You work at a library. I'm a materials researcher at Noventis Labs, I said. I have been for 6 years. The library job was during my graduate program. But you told us. My mother started. I never told you that, I said gently. When I mentioned my research position, you said, "That's nice," and asked Lauren about her promotion. I stopped correcting the assumption after the 3rd family dinner. Uncle Daniel finally understood. Wait, they didn't know. No, I said simply. My father stared at me. So you've been living some sort of secret life. Secret, I repeated softly. I invited you to my graduation. I mailed you my thesis. I called when my first patent was approved. You were busy planning Lauren's housewarming party. My mother's voice became small. You have a doctorate. Yes. Materials science. Rachel, my cousin, suddenly burst out laughing. Not politely but genuinely. Aunt May, she said between breaths. You told me last Christmas that Clara was still trying to find stable work. Uncle Daniel's tone shifted. Her research has been cited in multiple journals. She spoke at an international conference in Zurich last year. I assumed you were proud. No one touched their appetizers when they arrived. Lauren recovered first. Well, that's nice, Clara. But money isn't everything. Eric and I focus on balance. Real life. That sounds fulfilling, I said honestly. Uncle Daniel let out a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. She's not coasting. She's currently leading a biodegradable polymer project. If it scales, it could replace single-use plastics. My mother looked at me as if seeing a stranger. How much? Lauren asked abruptly. I hesitated. Through licensing and royalties. Around $12 million total. Before taxes. The silence returned, heavier this time. And I realized something then. I hadn't hidden my life. They had simply never looked closely enough to see it. The waiter stood frozen beside the table, unsure whether to place the appetizers or quietly disappear. No one had touched a single plate. Lauren was the first to recover. She always was. Control mattered to her more than comfort. Well, she said, straightening her posture. That's impressive, I guess. But money isn't everything. She glanced at my mother. Eric and I are focusing on stability, growth, real leadership. My promotion to senior floor supervisor comes with actual responsibility. That sounds meaningful, I said, and I meant it. Lauren's smile tightened. More meaningful than selling one idea and riding it forever. Uncle Daniel didn't even try to hide his reaction. Clara isn't riding anything. She's currently overseeing a research team developing a biodegradable polymer alternative. Early results are extraordinary. My father finally spoke again. Your firm handles her work. Yes, Uncle Daniel said. We've worked together since her second year of graduate school. She currently has 3 active patents, 2 more pending, and licensing agreements across multiple sectors. My mother's eyes flicked between us. I could see her counting, recalculating, trying to align this version of me with the quiet daughter she thought she knew. The coating patent wasn't even her largest deal, Uncle Daniel added. That was actually the self-repair compound, licensed for over $6 million, spread across manufacturers. Lauren shook her head. You expect us to believe she's made over $10 million. Licensed, I corrected. And the total is closer to 13, depending on royalties. Eric cleared his throat. So when you told Lauren last year that she should help you find a job with benefits, you said I was wasting my potential, I replied, looking directly at my sister. You suggested I apply where you worked because you could put in a good word. I was trying to help, she said weakly. You were trying to feel better, Rachel said from across the table. Everyone saw it. My father set his fork down hard. Why didn't you tell us? I inhaled slowly. I did. For years. You just weren't listening. That's not fair, my mother said. We always supported you. Uncle Daniel actually laughed, short and humorless. May, with respect, I've watched you introduce Clara as our quiet one, while praising Lauren for 20 minutes straight. 2 Thanksgivings ago, you didn't mention Clara at all. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. When Clara called me about the Greenfield offer, Uncle Daniel continued, softer now. She was crying. Not from happiness. From frustration. She tried to tell you both. You put her on speaker while watching a game and said, "That's nice, honey." Then you hung up. I remembered the call. Standing alone in my apartment, offer letter shaking in my hand, listening to the dial tone. We didn't know it was important, my father said quietly. A multi-million-dollar offer wasn't important, Uncle Daniel asked. Lauren pushed her chair back. This is Mom's birthday dinner. Can we not do this now? You're right, I said, standing. I reached into my purse and placed an envelope in front of my mother. Happy birthday. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a $40,000 check. What is this? She whispered. A gift, I said. You mentioned wanting to redo the kitchen last year. We can't accept this, my father said, though his eyes never left the check. You can, I replied. No conditions. You're still my parents. My mother started crying, real tears this time. I'm sorry, she said. I never meant to make you feel invisible. I know, I said gently. But I did. We'll fix this, my father said quickly. We'll listen. I'd like that, I said. But it has to be real. Rachel raised her glass. To Clara, the most successful person here, and the most overlooked. No one argued. Dinner continued, but the room had shifted. My father asked me what I was working on now. The first time in years. I told him. He listened. Actually listened. The dinner ended without any dramatic resolution. There were no speeches, no hugs, no sudden transformation. People gathered their coats quietly. Conversations muted and careful, like everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing and making it worse. Uncle Daniel stayed beside me, as he had all evening. My sister barely spoke. My mother kept glancing between me and the envelope, as if it might disappear if she stopped looking. As we stood near the entrance, my father pulled me aside. The kitchen, he said, not meeting my eyes. When we renovate, would you help us choose materials? I know it's not your field exactly. I design polymers, I said gently. Not cabinets. I know, he replied quickly. But you understand materials. Durability. I want to understand what you do. He looked older in that moment, smaller. Okay, I said. I can help. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a starting point. Uncle Daniel drove me home. The city lights blurred past the windows. You handled that with more grace than most people would, he said. I didn't want to punish them, I replied. I just didn't want to stay invisible. 3 weeks later, I received an email from my mother. No subject line. I framed your diploma. It's hanging in the living room. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you earned it. It was a small thing. But small things accumulate. The following Tuesday my father called. I'm building a raised planter in the backyard, he said. What do you think about composite materials versus treated wood? The project was clearly an excuse. I explained anyway. We talked for 45 minutes. He didn't change the subject once. 2 months later my sister sent a message. I'm sorry I felt threatened by you. I didn't know how else to feel important. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I'm sorry I let you think we were competing. The kitchen renovation began in early spring. My parents consulted me on everything. Countertops, sealants, finishes. They asked questions. Real ones. Questions that showed they were trying to understand, not just nod politely. My mother started sending me articles. Environmental studies. Research summaries. Some weren't even directly related to my work, but she thought I might find them interesting. That mattered. At my sister's birthday dinner in July, my mother introduced me as Dr. Clara Reynolds, our daughter, the materials researcher. She said it with pride. Then she spent just as long talking about my sister's promotion. It wasn't perfect, but it was balanced. Uncle Daniel and I had lunch the following week. How does it feel? He asked. Strange, I admitted. I spent so long being unseen that being noticed feels uncomfortable. You'll adjust, he said. You always do. That fall, my team received preliminary approval for large-scale testing on the biodegradable polymer project. We celebrated in the lab with cheap champagne and paper cups. I took a photo and sent it to the family group chat. My mother responded within minutes, asking questions about the process. My sister sent a congratulations message. My father called that evening and asked me to explain the project from the beginning. He did. He listened to all of it. In November, I received an invitation to speak at an environmental summit in Stockholm. The honorarium was $30,000. I forwarded the invitation to my parents. If you'd like to come, I'd love to have you there. They both said yes. They sat in the front row during my keynote. My mother cried during the standing ovation. At the airport on the way home, my father said quietly, I missed so much of your life. Yes, I replied. Can I be there for the rest of it? I thought about the years of being overlooked. The casual dismissals. The way silence can wound just as deeply as cruelty. Yes, I said. You can. The check I had given my mother was never cashed. Instead they framed it. They placed it beside my diploma in the living room, with a small plaque underneath that read, "Given with more grace than we deserved." I didn't know how to feel when I saw it for the first time. Gratified, maybe. Or sad. Possibly both. Change didn't come all at once. It came in pauses. My parents catching themselves mid-sentence, apologizing without being prompted. It came in phone calls where my father asked how my day was and waited for the answer. It came in the articles my mother forwarded with notes like, "I didn't understand all of this, but I tried." My sister and I were still awkward. Healing didn't erase history. But the sharp edge was gone. Our conversations no longer felt like comparisons disguised as concern. On Christmas Eve, Uncle Daniel raised a glass. "To Clara," he said, who reminded us that the quietest person in the room is often the one carrying the most weight. "And to second chances," my mother added softly. I raised my glass too. "To family," I said. "The complicated kind that chooses to do better." The projects continued. The patents came steadily. The work mattered, but it no longer felt like something I needed to use as proof of worth. The real victory was quieter. It was in my father calling just to talk. It was in my mother introducing me without hesitation. It was in my sister's messages that no longer felt defensive. I had spent years being invisible. Now I was seen. Not for the money. Not for the titles. But for the person I had always been. The revelation at my mother's birthday dinner wasn't revenge. It was simply truth, arriving late to the room. And the grace that followed, that was the real ending. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, emotional stories. And comment below. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family?